All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Carly, and I'm going to walk you through my causal loop diagram of the book Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which emphasizes the relationship between our ecosystem and the use of pesticides. All right, so we're going to start with pesticide use. What occurs initially is that the use of pesticides decreases pest populations, which then decreases the use of pesticides, thus creating a reinforcing feedback loop, as you can see here. However, with continued use of pesticides over time, the pests become resistant to the pesticides, allowing them to become more abundant, thus requiring more pesticides to be used. By dramatically decreasing the population of a species, the natural balance of the ecosystem is thrown off and other species begin to take over. This loop is also a reinforcing feedback loop. Now, with more pesticides used, more money is given to the pesticide industries through sales, and more pesticides are then used. This creates another reinforcing feedback loop. All right, so moving on, we'll now get into exposure. Outside of the effect on pests, the use of pesticides has great effects on the rest of the natural ecosystem. Back in the mid 1900s, this was widely overlooked. Pesticide use infiltrates the land and seeps into the water. This increases the risk of exposure for the animals that consume the vegetation, the fish that inhabit the water, and the people who work and play on the land, swim in the water, and eat the affected animals. As it occurred in the book, the exposure was vast as airplanes dropped pesticides on thousands of acres of land, affecting everything it touched in the process. So here you can see that an increase in pesticide use leads to an increase in exposure. Next, we're going to dive into the health effects. So pesticide exposure leads to extreme health effects to the vegetation, water sources, animals, humans, and everything in between. Pesticides are made of poisonous chemicals, which therefore poison anything they come in contact with. As reported in Silent Spring, entire species of Dutch elm trees were nearly wiped out in the spraying of them, as well as 90% of robins and other songbirds. Riverbanks that were sprayed killed the fish within them, as there were no longer bugs for the fish to eat. Squirrels, rabbits, and mice died, which therefore killed off larger animals that relied on smaller rodents for food. Humans exposed to pesticides suffered liver damage, nervous system damage, hormone imbalances, birth defects, cancer, and more. So these extreme health effects create public awareness. It is not a pleasant sight to see dead birds and dead trees around one's neighborhood, and it reaches a new level of panic when people's pets and children start being affected as well. With this increased public awareness, lawsuits are filed against the pesticide companies, causing them to lose money in legal battles. These lawsuits can create public awareness through media and word of mouth. This creates the first balancing feedback loop we have seen in this diagram, where money is lost to the industry, but awareness is gained to the public. So an increase in public awareness can also lead to an increase in legal regulations against pesticide use. With more regulations in place, more public awareness is created on the matter. This creates a reinforcing feedback loop. Let's look more into the legal regulations. So these legal regulations can decrease money to the industry by limiting the use of pesticides and charging fees for breaking any laws that are not abided by. Regulations that were created during the mid 1900s were abundant. In the book, there was a strong emphasis on the regulations surrounding the use of the most widely used pesticide, DDT, eventually banning it from use altogether. There were many other environmental laws and organizations introduced during this time, one of them being the creation of the EPA. So, looking again at this connection, an increase in legal regulations lead to a decrease in industry money. And wrapping up with our last connection here, less money in the industry leads to fewer pesticides being created and sold, therefore less pesticides being used. During this time in history, the downslide of the pesticide industry allowed for a flood of research and the creation of other strategies to control pests. So looking again Less money in the industry leads to less pesticide use. And this connection finishes our causal loop diagram. So, in conclusion, as learned from the book Silent Spring, the use of pesticides in the mid 1900s was a horrific environmental disaster that nearly wiped out entire species and harmed entire ecosystems from plants to animals to humans. Due to the death and destruction that occurred, the public enforced change through research, lawsuits, and new regulations. These regulations remain today, and much has been learned about the layered effects of chemicals on the health of our natural environment. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you learned something.